Get ready to rumble. Schilling Show Unleashed on the Seven Thunders Media Network. Former city councilor, husband, father, and community watchdog. Your host, Rob Schilling.
Welcome to the Schilling Show Unleashed Podcast. Remember, your direct support makes our show possible, and you can directly support this podcast by visiting shillingshow.com and then clicking on the Patreon banner at the top of the page to make a monthly contribution. We appreciate your support. The Schilling Show Unleashed Podcast welcomes James Golden, a.k.a. Bo Snerdley, longtime Rush Limbaugh producer and author of the new book, Rush on the Radio, a tribute from his sidekick for 30 years. And James, it's great to talk with you after hearing from you all these years as a Rush listener. Thanks for joining us today.
Well, my pleasure. Thanks for the invitation. I appreciate being here.
So tell us, first of all, I've always been curious about how you met Rush.
I met Rush his first day in New York, actually. Well, not his first day in New York, as he was coming into the ABC headquarters where he would do his show for the first time. I was the music director at that station for many years, did their last music show and then produced their first talk show. All this before Rush arrived, and I knew one of Rush's broadcast partners, Ed McLaughlin, who was the former president of ABC Radio Networks. They were coming in to the ABC headquarters at 1330 Avenue of the Americas as I was leaving. I met them, we struck up a conversation, and I remember very vividly that after they told me what the plans were for the syndicated show, I remarked, wow, to us that you're going to be bigger than Paul Harvey. Little did I realize two things. Number one, that my life would be so closely intertwined with the show and with Rush, and secondly, how much bigger than Paul Harvey. I mean, Paul Harvey at that time was the biggest thing in radio. And of course, Rush Limbaugh dominance in radio for 30 years has just been a something out of a historical dream. It's just incredible.
So this was a very different show, and I remember listening to it when it first came on the air back in the late 80s on KFI in Los Angeles. I'm very curious how you sold the show, because it was so different than anything that had been on the radio to that point.
You know, you just nailed it. I mean, that's one of the things that even people at WABC knew when they first heard Rush. Talk radio was, it was just, to me, kind of almost boring, to be frank, with the exception of a few personalities before Rush. Rush brought an energy to talk radio. He brought almost the sensibilities of a top 40 disc jockey into the mix, yet he was doing politics, he was doing cultural issues. In the first few years of the show, it was a lot more cultural and a lot less politics. That changed after the Clinton years, when the country, I think, started to become a lot more political. And part of it was because from Rush, people were hearing that there was another side for the very first time. And there was also tens of thousands, millions of people who began to identify themselves as conservatives thanks to the way Rush articulated conservatism.
James, I remember some of the early controversies back in those days when people were mad at Rush for using a term like feminazi, or I remember the Homeless Update theme song and Clarence Frogman and all of that generated. But that was just part of the buzz of the show, and it was wonderful. Did Rush anticipate the sort of blowback he got from some of those things?
I don't know, to be honest with you. I do know that what he didn't anticipate were the horrible names that would come from members of the left. I mean, that's just part of their handbook. Mm-hmm. Anytime they have a disagreement with you, immediately they reach out to words like racist, homophobe, et cetera, et cetera. Now, that he did not expect. But some of those minor controversies, I don't know whether he expected them or not. And to be honest with you, they didn't really have any lasting impact. As you're right, they just helped create the buzz about the show. I think the left, though, you talk about unexpected, the left had never experienced the kind of ridicule and sarcastic ridicule that Rush brought to the table, and they were highly offended.
Indeed, they were, and I can remember a lot of the responses over the years to Rush's unique attempt to ridicule the left, and he was so good at it. Where did Rush develop that sense of humor that was so unique and so cutting?
Here's a guy who, as best I can tell, who started honing his skills for broadcasting at age 6, which is pretty remarkable, to an audience of 1, using a Remco Carvel radio set, broadcasting inside of his house. Rush has related the stories of him being a very young kid, doing play-by-play, sitting down trying to do play-by-play, turning down the sound on sports games, and him doing the play-by-play. Rush was a guy who was passionate about broadcasting from the time he was pre-teen. And by the time he was a teenager, he was working in the industry. He developed his skills along the way. The best I can tell, he developed a unique set of skills. There's no one in the industry. I mean, we have great broadcasters in this industry. We have incredibly gifted personalities doing talk. We have people that bring their own skill sets from other verticals that they've come into before they were in broadcasting. And with all of that, Rush still was able to remain at the top of his game for 33 years. His show never stopped growing from the time it came on the air. He just had a unique set of skills that he had honed over his entire career, because this is really what he wanted to do. He was passionate about broadcasting. He loved it. He used to jest that he was born to host, and we were born to listen. And I think that's a half jest, because it really does seem to me that he truly was born to be on the radio.
I got to ask you, James Golden, what it was like day to day. Rush was always super prepared. I've never heard anybody who had their hands on the facts like Rush did. And so how did that happen?
By preparation. I mean, this is a guy that Rush used to say that life is show prep. And if some of us after the show, there were 3 of us there, Dawn Baczynski, our stenographer, our engineer, Brian Johnson, and myself, were there most of the time in the Florida studios for about 20 of the 33 years that Rush was doing a syndicated show. If we stayed for any reason after Rush had gone, it wouldn't take but about an hour, and Rush's printer would start going off, his remote printer would start firing off with stories he was starting to already accumulate for the next day's program. He was relentless about preparation. He spent hours and hours doing it, and that's the thing that I think a lot of people who want to do radio in the beginning really don't understand. If you choose this life of talk radio, and if you really want to be great at it, it is going to require amazing hours, because you do have to do the research. You have to be well acquainted with the issues. No one can do the research for you. I mean, people can give you stories. They can help you. Like, I would bring in a stack of news stories that I thought Rush would be interested in. But it still becomes incumbent upon the host of the program to do the heavy lift, to read through all that material, to find the best stories that comport to what it is that they're trying to do with the show. Nobody can do that for you. He was just always super well prepared, because that's who he was. He'd get to the office early, do his show, and then if he went home after the show, he'd start working again for the next day.
Tell us about screening calls for the show, because part of the success of the show, of course, was that the callers were chosen for their qualities and not just dumping anybody on the air who called in. So how did that go, and what were some of the strangest or most interesting interactions over the years?
Well, I have always been, I was, as I said earlier, I was the first producer when WABC Radio, the iconic station in New York, went talk. And part of that was also screening calls. I've always been serious about screening calls, because I thought they presented an added value to a program, not just taking anything that comes through the door because the phone's ringing. Mm-hmm. when Rush and when I was finally rotated on the show, I think that's one of the things that made us click. I mean, I was as passionate about radio as Rush was, and I understood the value of having good calls. And so he would often joke that it was the most tightly screened program in radio, but that wasn't a joke. I mean, we really did. I rejected more calls than I took in over the years, and that was just standard practice. We wanted the very best in everything, the best callers, the best presentation. Well, seriously, if you put together all the good ingredients, all great ingredients, that starts to sound like a pizza commercial, maybe, but then you get a great product, and that's just what it was. We wanted every single aspect of the show to be as good as it could possibly be.
Talk about some of the medical issues that cropped up along the way, and I guess the one of them that was so devastating a little earlier on was the loss of hearing, and Rush working his way through that. I mean, that was absolutely incredible, the lengths to which he went to continue his program.
Here's what's really incredible. Of the 33 years that Rush Limbaugh did a syndicated show, the majority of the time he did the show completely deaf, and with a cochlear implant as the vehicle that he could hear. So, yes, he was incredible when it comes to that. Most people, and by the way, the level of success that he had prior to his losing his hearings would have enabled him to lead a very comfortable life without ever having to work again. But this is what he was passionate about, and so he did not let an autoimmune disease that affected him and shut down his hearing. He didn't let that stop him. He figured out a way, with the help of Dawn Baczynski, who was our stenographer. In the beginning, when he was completely deaf, Brian Johnson and Dawn just came up with the most creative ideas to keep it going. We had all kind of color code systems. Dawn would type in things with symbols so he could tell whether a caller, what emotional state was added to the call. I mean, everyone went all out, but it was Rush that went all out with his determination that he was going to still do the program and do it with the same level of excellence that we were used to, and that's what he did. He's such an inspiring figure when it comes to that. And you didn't ask, but I'll add too. I mean, the addiction that came to painkillers. Mm-hmm. You know, I was there and witnessed the horrible pain he was in after he had surgery. Like many other Americans, he didn't realize that opiates, to the extent that opiates were being used as painkillers, how devastating they were. Millions of Americans suffered through that. But once Rush got past that stage of it and decided that, okay, I need help with this, he got the help with it. And what he didn't do, like so many others, is continue to relapse before finding success. He applied that same kind of determination that he had with the hearing, with everything else, and just made a success out of it. We're all flawed human beings,
yes,
you know, but Rush Limbaugh was just an incredibly disciplined man when it came to, once he made up his mind up about something, to achieving excellence. And he was just all about achieving excellence.
I'm very curious your take, America Without Rush. I've looked at the talk radio ratings coming through the Nielsen reports, and they're down dramatically all across the country. America's missing Rush in many, many ways.
Yeah, and that's for now. But here's what I think. You know, I'm an optimist, and I think that Rush's legacy is, first of all, his footprint was bigger than talk radio. If it were not for Rush, we wouldn't have so many conservative outlets now, be they print or in the electronic media, even though some of them are fledgling cable news efforts to appeal to a wider audience than just what the mainstream press offers up. With talk radio, I am convinced that, yeah, there's going to be a time maybe of a little bit of retrenchment, but we've got some amazing talent, very talented people that are delivering great programs, and they are needed. So I think that the industry is going to continue to grow. I think that it's part of Rush's legacy. I think you're going to find a young crop of conservatives coming up who are in their 20s right now, who are just beginning their careers, and one of them is going to catch fire in ways that we can't expect. Also, the world is changing, you know. A lot of communication is happening on social media, and already There are young conservatives there that are taking what they learned from Rush and what was created by Rush and applying it in that space. So I'm just full of optimism. I think that we're headed for a really robust and good showing from a lot of talk radio hosts that are just now becoming more and more known, and also in other fields.
James Golden, finally, if there was one thing you wanted people to know about Rush Limbaugh that they may not know, what would it be?
The tongue-in-cheek bombacity that was part of his air persona was just that. It was tongue-in-cheek. It was part of the performance. The Rush Limbaugh behind the scenes was such a quiet guy, always humble, a true gentleman, so polite, so generous, such a loving human being. We had a staff that stayed together for almost 3 decades. Once people came on, they didn't venture too far. If they did, it wasn't for too long. Rush was the glue that held all that together, because this went beyond a job. We all in our staff, every one of us, to a person, loved Rush Limbaugh. He was an incredible human being, will always be missed, and will always be near and dear in our hearts.
That is an incredible legacy. James Golden, if people would like to get a copy of your book, Rush on the Radio, tell us where they could do that.
JamesGolden.com. We'll lead you to the right place on Amazon, because there are a few shysters out there that have come up with ways to scam even that. Or Amazon or Barnes & Noble, wherever fine books are sold. But if you're going to do that, be really careful, because there are some scammers who put their own name and steal the cover. So just be careful. Make sure you got the right one by James Golden, a.k.a. Bo Snerdley. Easiest way is, though, to go to JamesGolden.com. We'll take you to the right place.
James Golden, it's been a pleasure talking with you. Thanks for joining us today on the Schilling Show Unleashed podcast.
Well, thank you again for having me. What a treat to be here. I'd love to do it again sometime if you're open to it.
That concludes another edition of the Schilling Show Unleashed podcast. Visit us online at schillingshow.com, where you can directly support this podcast by clicking on the Patreon banner at the top of the page and making a monthly donation. Your support is essential for the continuation of the Schilling Show Unleashed podcast. Until next time,